This is the History of New Zealand podcast on the Eat to My Own Beat podcast network. Welcome back to the History of New Zealand, episode 23. Te Kooti's War. Te Kooti's War was fought in the East Coast region and across the heavily forested central North Island and Bay of Plenty between the government military forces and the followers of the spiritual leader Te Kooti Erekaranki Te Turiki. The conflict was sparked by Te Kooti's return to New Zealand after 2 years of internment on the Chatham Islands, from where he had escaped with almost 200 Maori prisoners of war and their families. Te Kooti, who had been held without trial on the island for 2 years, asked that he and his followers be left in peace. But within 2 weeks, they were being pursued by a force of militia, government troops, and Maori volunteers. The pursuits turned into a 4-year guerrilla war involving more than 30 expeditions by colonial and Maori troops against Te Kooti's dwindling number of warriors. Although initially fighting defensively against the pursuing government forces, Te Kooti went on to the offensive in November of 1868, starting with the so-called Poverty Bay Massacre, a well-organized lightning strike against elected settlers and Maori opponents in the Matauerero district, in which 51 men, women, and children were slaughtered in their homes set alight. The attack prompted another vigorous pursuit by government forces, which included a siege at Nagatapa that came to a bloody end. Although Te Kooti escaped the siege, Maori forces loyal to the government caught and executed more than 130 of his supporters, as well as prisoners he had earlier seized. Dissatisfied with the Maori King movements, reluctant to continue the fight against European invasion and confiscation, Te Kooti offered Maori an Old Testament vision of salvation from oppression and the return to promised land. Wounded 3 times in battle, he gained a reputation for being immune to death and uttered prophecies that he had appeared of being fulfilled. In early 1870, Te Kooti gained refuge from Tuhu tribes, which consequently suffered a series of damaging raids in which crops and villages were destroyed. After other Maori iwi were lured by the promise of a £5,000 reward or £5,000 reward to the Te Kooti's capture, Te Kooti was finally granted sanctuary by the Maori king in 1872 and moved to the King country, where he continued to develop rituals, texts, and prayers of Ringatu faith. He was formally pardoned by the government in February 1883 and died in 1893. A 2013 Waitangi Tribunal report said the action of the Crown forces on the East Coast from 1865 to 1869, the East Coast Wars, and the start of the Te Kooti War resulted in the deaths of proportionately more Maori than in any other district during the New Zealand Wars. It condemned the illegal imprisonment of the Chatham Islands of a quarter of the East Coast region's adult male population and said that the loss in the war of an estimated 43% of the male population. Many thought acts of lawless brutality were slain on New Zealand's history and character. Thank you for listening to the History of New Zealand podcast. We're found on YouTube and anywhere else you could find your normal podcasts. Please like, comment, and subscribe, or find us at www.eattomyownbeat.com.